What is good, everybody? Welcome to the Gold Standard Podcast, an instant reaction Gold Standard podcast. I'm Rob Stats Guerrera here with you. Going to be joined by Jason Aponte in a minute. We've got a little breaking news on a Saturday for you with the 49ers. We finally know who is the defensive coordinator of this football team. It is going to be Nick Sorensen. But as always, the 49ers can never do anything boring, right? They always make it interesting for us. So they didn't just promote Nick Sorensen to defensive coordinator. They also hired former Chargers head coach Brandon Staley to be the assistant head coach. And the word is that we are getting is that Staley's going to be heavily involved in the defense, heavily involved in the defensive game plan. And so it's sort of a two-headed monster from the 49ers here. We had heard Jeff Ulbrich was a possibility. Staley himself interviewed for the position. Now he is Nick Sorensen's boss, I guess, kind of. I'm really fascinated and interested in how that's going to work exactly. Excuse me. This is what I think the 49ers are going to do. First, I'll get into how I think the 49ers want this to work, and then we can talk about how I think it's actually going to work. And again, Jason Aponte is going to join us. He's literally arriving home from the combine as we speak. So, and he talked to people out there, so I want to get his view of it. David Lombardi had a pretty good tweet that I think kind of sums up the 49ers position. Surprise, surprise. Let me share that on the screen now. So Lombardi says, basically, they like Staley because he was good as a coordinator in 2020. He's a Vic Fangio guy. Kyle's always liked the Vic Fangio system. To quote Lombardi, Staley impressed Shanahan with his game plans against top opposing defenses, including the 49ers in 2022. Shanahan, however, didn't want to abandon San Francisco's 4-3 defensive identity, which is rooted in their linebacker play, so they promoted Sorensen to DC and added Staley to the staff. They'll presumably allow him to infuse his cloud or disguised coverage concepts into the secondary. Goal number one for the Niners, tie the front and the back end together better than last season when they slipped from 1st to 12th in EPA rankings. Now, let me just say for the record, I don't think the 49ers give a crap about what their EPA rankings are. I think they care about how many points they give up. And say what you want about Steve Wilks, his team was 3rd in the NFL in points allowed. Essentially, I think the 49ers are trying to split the baby. I think they want Brandon Staley to add to the scheme in some ways, but they also know bringing in an outsider is tough for the locker room. They want somebody that's grounded. I think they realized the mistake they made was thinking you could just have Steve Wilks there. He could learn the scheme and run the scheme, and that everything was going to be fine. You could just take the good from one, mix it with the good from the other, and there we go. What they're trying to do now, I think, is they're trying to say, yes, we want Staley to do all that, but Sorensen's going to be there to make sure we're not getting away from our core principles type of thing. We are not abandoning who we are. Basically, if he starts to do anything that gets him off the rails, Sorensen can be there to kind of steer the ship and put them back. I don't know the answer to this. I don't know if this is true or not, but there are reports that Kyle Shanahan was heavily involved in the defensive game planning for the Super Bowl, along with Nick Sorensen. Maybe, and I thought the 49ers defense played well in the Super Bowl, maybe that kind of showed Kyle like, hey, this can kind of work. You know, maybe Sorensen in this role, we can do this. And so we combine him with Staley, and that's how it's going to go. I don't know what to think about this. This is interesting. Let me read this comment from Roadhog 228. Maybe Staley helps with game management also. Well, you know I've been talking about that, how anybody that can help Kyle Shanahan go for it more on 4th down, I support that. And Brandon Staley certainly did that when he was the head coach of the Chargers. I don't know. Is this much different than what they were doing last year, right? Sorensen was on the staff last year. If you wanted someone to kind of keep the ship on the rails while tweaking it a little bit, why couldn't he do that last year? Maybe he didn't feel like he had the authority because he wasn't the defensive coordinator. Steve Wilks was. That could be a thing. That's a real thing. There is a hierarchy. You know, I don't know. That could be what the 49ers thinking is. But if Staley's the assistant head coach, wouldn't that put him above Sorensen sort of on the hierarchy there in the hiring chart? I don't know. I go back to last year. Wilkes talked about his early quote unquote struggles, or at least the dissatisfaction. I don't know. He talked about that 3-game stretch. And what he said was, and this always stuck with me, he said, my problem wasn't that I changed the scheme or went away from the scheme. The problem was that I didn't change it enough. And when he said that, I was like, oh, okay, maybe he went in trying to do everything like D'Amico Ryans, and other teams were ready for it because they had spent a whole offseason preparing for it. Maybe Wilkes then learned, okay, I've got to add my own stuff and tweak it a little bit because they're not prepared for that. And the defense, of course, had the bye week, came out after the bye week, and they were awesome. They played fantastic. So how much is Brandon Staley going to change things? That would be my question. And can he and Sorenson, since this is a, dual-headed approach, can they marry the coverage together properly like the 49ers want? We don't know. Nobody knows. I'm looking through the chat here. Let's read some messages to get how you're thinking. Nick Eller, YouTube channel member, says, I like this hire. Staley's mind is a huge asset. Get to groom Nick Sorensen and have a fallback if he struggles, but we have an outside mind and an internal play caller. Well, I think that's true. But, you could say you have a fall guy, but if you want Brandon Staley to coach the defense, just let him coach the defense. Like, you don't need to fire Nick Sorensen first. I do think that Staley's mind is a good asset. Everybody, say what you want about Brandon Staley, the head coach. Nobody disputes the guy knows defense. I mean, we saw it with the Rams in the 1 year there. They were mediocre before and after him. He knows defense. Being able to get in a room and game plan for somebody, that's a very specific skill. And by all accounts, Brandon Staley has that. The other parts, the managerial parts about being a head coach and all the other stuff, he was not very good at with the Chargers, clearly. But I think the Niners are hoping to harness that game plan skill with what they already do and combine them together. Why do you need two guys to do that, though? That would be the question. And maybe it's about selling it to the locker room. I don't know. But, what's it going to look like to the defense? And I can ask Jason Aponte this when he hops in. What's it going to look like to the defense when there's some sort of dispute or Sorensen gets up there and tries to say, hey, guys, we're going to do X, Y, and Z. And everybody on the whole defense knows, dude, you didn't come up with this game plan. This is Brandon Staley's game plan. It seems like they might have to sell that to the locker room a little bit. I don't know. That's what I think, by the way. Shout out to Nick Eller, though, YouTube channel member, and all our YouTube channel members. Please become one. Help support the channel. Help support me. It's less than $3 a month. You get priority comment response. You get custom emojis, and you get membership badges as well. So please, please do it. Patrick Lucero says, not a fan. There needs to be a united front on D, and this is more the same like last year. Are they united? Is everybody pulling in the same direction? Now, here's something to think about. The team obviously knows Sorensen, right? He's been there. Let me throw it up here on the screen, just in case you don't know about Nick Sorensen, which how many people do, let's be honest. He came to the 49ers a couple of years ago as a defensive assistant. He was the defensive passing game specialist / nickelbacks coach last year. Before he was in San Francisco, he was the special teams coordinator for the Jaguars. And before that, he spent almost a decade with Pete Carroll in Seattle. He doesn't have linebacker experience. That's something that was important to the 49ers. They wanted somebody because they feel like their whole scheme is about the linebackers and tying the linebackers to coverage and the pass rush and everything. They think the key is the linebacker. So they wanted someone with linebacker experience. Sorensen doesn't have that. So they were willing to go away from that. Again, they're hoping that the combined forces of Sorensen and Staley, sounds like a law firm, doesn't it? Sorensen and Staley. They're hoping that that's enough. And maybe it will be. I'm not here telling you this is not going to work. That is not my official position. I hope I've made that clear. What I'm saying is this is not normal. Doesn't mean it won't work. It just means this is very, very strange. It does feel like if it doesn't work and they wanted to get rid of Staley altogether, they could do that and not really change fundamentally the core of their system. If they wanted to get rid of Sorensen and promote Staley, they could do that if they wanted to do it, right? But it also kind of feels like a stopgap. Like they wanted Jeff Ulbrich from the Jets. That was the scuttlebutt at the combine, to quote Matt Barrows. That was really the guy they wanted. Obviously, he has linebacker experience. He played linebacker for the 49ers in the NFL. He has experience in the scheme, obviously working under Robert Saleh. He's a fiery kind of a guy on the sidelines also. He seemed to check all the boxes for the 49ers. But the problem was they couldn't get him. He has a contract with the Jets, and the Jets are under no inclination to let him go to the 49ers. There's no reason to do that. Robert Saleh is trying to hang on to his job by a thread. The only good thing with the Jets is their defense, so why would he want to let his coordinator go? So they couldn't get Jeff Ulbrich. And so now it feels like they came up with this plan B, which sometimes you have to do in the NFL. That's not a knock on them. But really what their hope is that Robert Saleh and or Jeff Ulbrich will get fired after the year, and then they can go hire them. I would like to know, I'd be interested to know, what is the contract situation? Is this a one-year deal with Brandon Staley to be the assistant head coach? What is that situation? It probably is. I don't know if they always release that information, but I bet it's a 1 year. I bet it's a short-term thing. Jared says, this is not going to work. Jeremy, I like this point, says, we had two guys replace Adam Peters too. Maybe having two heads, they can focus on multiple issues. William Mack says, so we prioritize scheme over development because our corners grew leaps and bounds under Wilkes. I'm fine with these moves though. I think the 49ers think that they can't shift the scheme and change the roster quick enough and still compete for a Super Bowl. So I think that's why they really want to stick with the scheme. It's not that like they love this scheme so much and it's so great. It's okay, if you want to change it, well, now we don't have the personnel to run it, so it's not going to work. And again, they're in this Super Bowl window. So I think that's why they wanted to stick with the scheme more than anything else. I don't think it's necessarily just because they love it so much. Jared says, stats, this news didn't even make the Friday news dump. That's true. It broke Saturday morning on the East Coast. It broke like 7:30, 8 o'clock East Coast time. That is, I'm sure that wasn't by accident. Actually, this is a good question. Waltony 101, is Sorenson on the sideline with Staley in the booth? Then you get the best of both worlds. That's a good question. I don't know. I'm going to write that down. I'm going to ask Jason Aponte when he joins us. Very good question, Waltony 101. The Twitch fam coming through again. Sorenson sideline. That's a very good question. And then do they switch them if it doesn't work out? Oh, brother. JCG 1987 says that's back-to-back on Staley replacing a position that Anthony Lynn just vacated. That's true. Anthony Lynn was the assistant head coach last year. That's funny. Maybe we should, go to a different staff besides the Chargers. Just say they haven't had the best luck. There was I don't know if I call it a report, but there was a little drip of news that came out from Diana Rossini that the Niners actually flirted with Steve Spagnuolo after the Super Bowl to see if he would come over, which, by the way, I love. That would have been awesome if they could have pulled it off. But what was the 49ers offer to Steve Spagnuolo? Hey, Steve, leave the best team in the NFL with the best quarterback in the NFL and the best offensive mind of his generation and come to the 49ers with a worse quarterback, with a coaching staff that's none of your own, and run our system. Not exactly an attractive pitch if you're the 49ers. But hey, you know what? They picked up the phone. There was also a report that they picked up the phone and called Bill Belichick. Not surprising that he wouldn't want to do it, but I do like that they were willing to do it. Brad Kapler says, could you see Sorensen and Staley being co-defensive coordinators? No, that's not. Sorensen is the defensive coordinator and Staley is the assistant head coach. Those are the official opinions that they are going with. Jesus M says, Kyle really doesn't know how to hire coaches. I disagree with that. I think he does. He hired Robert Saleh, who was a good defensive coordinator. He hired DeMeco Ryans, who was incredible, even better than Saleh as a defensive coordinator, especially. And now he looks like a good head coach. I mean, look what he did with Houston in a year where nobody thought they were going to compete. So I think I do give Kyle credit for hiring coaches. Mike McDaniel, he hired Mike McDaniel. He's fantastic. I do think that's a skill by Kyle Shanahan. I disagree with that, Jesus. I think he is good at hiring coaches, and it's something that you have to do a lot as a head coach. And I think the 49ers are lucky that Kyle is as good at it as he is. Think about how many head coaches they've had to replace. A lot. Not head coaches, assistant coaches. They have had to replace assistant coaches on the defensive side of the ball, assistant coaches on the offensive side of the ball, and not just an offensive assistant, a defensive assistant. Like key core members of Kyle Shanahan's sort of inner circle were there and then gone. And Kyle had to figure that out. And they had to reshuffle it. And Chris Forster, the offensive line coach, talked about how, like, hey, at first it took us kind of a minute to figure out all our new responsibilities and have to reshuffle things a little bit. It's hard to do. And you had to do it during the season too. You had to figure out how much that actually has to work. I'm just looking at Twitter here. Tim Kawakami says Sorensen calling a familiar style of 49ers defense with Staley's brain power in the background is a pretty good way to do this once the Jets didn't make Ulbrich available. I really do think Ulbrich was the main choice. But, look, you have to have backup plans. I don't want to like bash them because they couldn't get their main choice. Like that happens all the time in the NFL. You have your plan, but you also have to have plan B, plan C. And this is the best one that they could come up with. I don't know how I feel. It seems like most people feel negative in the chat. If I could get the vibe correctly. Let's see. Nick Ellert says the best defensive coordinators or minds all got fired as coaches. Fangio, Schwartz, Spags, Belichick. Don't write Staley's legacy yet. I mean, saying Bill Belichick got fired. I mean, yes, he got fired, but like he also won 6 Super Bowls as a head coach before that. Like I wouldn't lump Belichick in with those guys, but your point is a good one. There are people that are just better at doing the coordinator job. It's 2 different jobs. And I always talk about this story. Nick Ellert says he was fired from the Browns. Yeah, okay, but then he became a head coach and was the greatest head coach of all time, Nick. It's 2 different jobs. One job, you're in a dark room studying film all the time. The other job, you're trying to do that, but you're also managing when 6 different guys come into your office. Hey, I got this problem. I got that problem. Which hotel do you want to stay in on the road in the preseason? Like that's stuff the head coach has to worry about. So you can't judge somebody's ability as a coordinator based on how they do as a head coach. Looks like Jason Aponte is here. Jason, fresh off the combine. You got your dunk in there. I see it. How you doing, man?
Living the dream, man. Living the dream. Yeah, just literally got off the plane just now and got in. Sorry that it took me so long to hop on, but looking over here as well too. So it was a little bit tougher to get back.
Well, I appreciate you hopping in literally fresh out of the car as you arrive home after a long trip at the combine. The news, I'm sure you've seen it. I saw you tweeting about it. Nick Sorensen, defensive coordinator, Brandon Staley, assistant head coach. You were at the combine. You talked to people. What's your kind of general reaction when you hear this news officially now?
Not a shock at all. It felt like the Sorensen thing was kind of a done deal from everybody that I spoke to, and it sounded like it was something that exhausted all of their interview options, but it was going to be Sorensen no matter what. And I think the part that I find funny about this is just the initial reaction to it is, well, why this guy and who's that guy? And it's like literally the same sort of reaction to when Robert Saleh came over as the linebacker coach from the Jaguars. Oh, well, why D'Amico Ryans, even though he has linebacker experience in the NFL? Sorensen played 10 years as a safety. I think, while everybody thought that Steve Wilkes was going to be a boost for the secondary, I kind of looked at this as like a boost for the secondary, especially when you're thinking about a safety and you're thinking about Hufanga and Tig Brown next year as well too. So it doesn't seem like it's much of a surprise. It sounded like it was almost a done deal with all the people that I spoke to there in Indy. I am not shocked at all when I saw the news.
Interesting. So maybe Sorensen was always going to be part of the plan. That would have been even tougher to get Jeff Ulbrich out of his contract with the Jets than if Sorensen was always going to be in the mix. Do you feel like the Niners are trying to split the baby a little bit? That they want to keep their identity, so they're going with Sorensen. That's the guy the players know. But also they want to kind of evolve the defense, so they're bringing in Brandon Staley because he can come up with some good game plans.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, Anthony Lynn was the assistant head coach for 3 years, and he's from the same Charger system. So I think a lot of people are overthinking the Staley thing a little bit. But I do think that if we're talking about fringe benefits of having Staley, is the fact that regardless of whatever you think he is as the Chargers head coach, which obviously it did not go well, him being able to focus in on defensive game plans is probably the best thing for him. So I don't like pointing to the 2020 season. That COVID year was very weird, but the Rams did have a great defense under Staley. But I do understand that Staley is creative, and I do think that they're trying to evolve in a little bit. But I do want to say this. I do feel like this move feels like the 49ers keeping themselves open for business for next year a
Mhm.
little bit, just in case. And that's my tinfoil hat theory.
I said the same thing before you hopped in. They know things with the Jets might not go well. Jeff Ulbrich could be a free agent looking for a job next year. Who knows? The first thing I thought of was, and you'll appreciate this as a Seinfeld fan.
Hmm.
They hired two guys, or they promoted two guys to replace Adam Peters. Now they've basically have two guys to replace Steve Wilkes at defensive coordinator. It made me think of this from Seinfeld.
Maybe the two of us working together at full capacity could do the job of one normal man.
But each of us would only have to be like a half man.
Half a man.
That sounds about right.
That's about right.
Right? Like, kind of does feel like that a little bit. Working together, we could be one defensive coordinator.
You know what's the best part about that scene is George goes, "What if the two of us teamed up together?" And Jerry's like, "Not." He's like, "No." He's like, "No, not, not." Like that scene is so good. But look,
Mhm.
I do think there is a little bit to the idea of having someone who is integrated into the scheme, and then you have someone who's going to evolve it a little bit more. But my point about being open for business was I had a conversation with somebody who's high up in the 49ers organization in the front office. And what I was asking about was, I look around this place and I see all of the 49ers graduates, right? The coaches, the other guys. And I asked what was the glue to keeping that all together? And he said flat out, it's John Lynch. And he goes, the thing about this tree is guys leave, but they can always come back. And now that we've kind of seen how this is playing out, that has way more of an impact now than I ever thought it would have. Because I thought it was just more about, we're all friends, we're the fraternity. But that kind of feels a little bit like, hey, this year we're gonna try this, we're gonna try to make this work. But there is a chance that Robert Saleh does come available. There is a chance that Ulbrich does become available next season. I wouldn't doubt that the 49ers wouldn't be all over trying to get those guys back unless, Sorensen turns into a DC that nobody saw coming.
Interesting. Yeah, when you say that, that makes me think maybe they're like, "Hey, Robert Saleh, just so you know, the door is always open."
Hmm. Yeah, it felt like what he was saying was, you know, they'll always find their way back. And I think that's what when you listen to the Playmakers podcast and you listen to like that fraternity and not the head coaching guys, like it's obviously not like Matt LaFleur is not going to come over and be an offensive coordinator or Sean McVay. It's not like that. It's like those guys that like when you kind of build in the same building, even though Saleh came from the Jaguars, when you build in the same building for so long, it feels like there's a chance that, the door is always open for them to come back. So again, the season's gonna largely depend on how he does, and then we'll see what happens. But and he also has to become available. The Jets have a very good chance if Aaron Rodgers plays well this year to like be a playoff team and actually win some games. So a lot of dominoes have to fall first.
Very, very true. Do you think that Sorensen will be on the sideline and Staley will be up in the booth?
Probably. I mean, Anthony Lynn was on the sideline and everything as well too. But I think there's just that Staley thing. Like I see the outrage and I just see people. Oh my god! It's just like you didn't even bat an eye that Anthony Lynn was the assistant head coach. Like you didn't bat one eyelid at it. You didn't care. It didn't matter, honestly. If someone can be there that can delegate just a little bit more responsibility from Kyle Shanahan in any way, and possibly help game plan and scheme, maybe take that off his plate, as we saw that Kyle Shanahan was being more and more involved as a defensive guy, down the season with Wilkes, then it's a win. I mean, I think again, you're conflating Brandon Staley, the head coach, with Brandon Staley, the defensive mind. And I think because you've seen the Chargers defensive group end up like last and here and there, you're forgetting Joey Bosa got hurt. JC Jackson was a disaster. Khalil Mack's at the end of his time. Like it's just there's a lot of things that go into it. And was Brandon Staley a good coach? Obviously not. But I think you're just forgetting that he's still a defensive mind. And I think that's the part that people are just losing sight of right now.
Yeah, it's funny. We sort of criticize Kyle from all angles, right? He's too controlling, but he also listens to the players too much and lets them run the show. He is too controlling. He has too much on his plate, but then they hire an assistant head coach and people are mad about that. Like sometimes you can't win for losing. I feel like I've said I don't know like if this is going to work. What I've said is it seems unorthodox. This is not something I feel like you usually see, and I do worry like who gets the final call if there's some sort of disagreement, because like technically Staley's above Sorensen, right, as assistant head coach. So that seems like they're going to have to work out that relationship.
Yeah, I don't necessarily worry that much about that because I think at the end of the day, the guy who has the real the real say is going to be Kyle. Obviously, he calls timeout when he sees a cover zero look. So if like Kyle doesn't see something like that he likes, I think that's guy that's going to overrule it. But I think Staley's in a position right now after being humbled, after being a head coach, that you kind of just have to roll with it, right? Like, and you kind of just have to at this point it's twofold. I think, all right, there's two ways to look at it. He could, assert his dominance and try to get himself back into a position where someone would like at least entertain bringing him in. But also, there's kind of a humbling point where you have to kind of get in where you fit in, and you have to kind of do what you can to make things move. So again, it's not the Staley thing. That part is the part that's the most non-consequential in my opinion, because you had Anthony Lynn for that long as the assistant head coach, and outside of the people that are like hardcore for this fan base, I mean, both made pretty much everybody is. They didn't even know he was there. I don't see why now all of a sudden Brandon Staley is going to be there now, and then all of a sudden it's like I don't know.
So the 49ers are going to have to hire someone to replace Sorensen. So there's still one more hire possibly that could be made on the staff. Diana Rossini kind of surprised everybody with her report that the Niners went after Spags after the Super Bowl. I love the thought. It's great. Did you hear anything about that when you were in Indy at the Combine?
I didn't actually. I mean, that was I got that same sort of news as the way you did. That wasn't something that was really discussed. Of all the things that I heard, there was nothing about that at all. I mean, I did talk to a few Kansas City people. I mean, and by the way, Kansas City, the Chiefs didn't keep any of their people in town at all. They all just said, "All right, we're watching this on TV and we're going home." Like the luxury of winning how many Super Bowls. But it's it's a little bit like I understand why they would do it. But the Kansas City people that I talked to, they were kind of surprised that the 49ers wouldn't be in on Merritt. And I talked to a Giants guy who Merritt followed him around, Spagnola, when he was with the Giants. And he felt that Merritt has always deserved a job. But when he was here with the Giants and they won those Super Bowls, he was raising a family here in Jersey, and he didn't want to move, he didn't want a job, anything like that. So when you look around like, oh well, why hasn't anybody hired? Sometimes guys just don't want jobs, like they're fine, right? But then he moved his family to Kansas City with Spagnola, and it feels like this is his moment now to try and find a job because his kids are grown. These were all the things that I kind of heard about that. A lot of people were really surprised that the 49ers didn't put on like more of a full court press with Merritt. And the Giants people that I spoke to believe that he's going to be eventually, a defensive coordinator and jump into a head coaching role. And I think that was something that I walked away with, being impressed by.
Yeah, that's kind of surprising when you look at his resume. He stayed with the Giants for 11 years. He was with them
Yep.
from 06 to 2017. Look, they want I think they feel like if we change the scheme, we won't have the right players, and so we're going to have to that's going to take too much time. And they still want to try and make another run at this Super Bowl. I think that is why they're so devoted to the scheme. I don't think it's like in particular because they think it's like the most brilliant thing of all time. I just think it's like, hey, this is sort of the car that we're in right now.
Yeah, and the other thing is too is if you look at all the candidates and then you start to hear about the prospects that the 49ers have been, meeting with formally, informally, they're all secondary guys. They're all secondary guys, and then you hear, hey, they interviewed with Kool-Aid, they interviewed with this guy, they interviewed this, like I wonder if there's going to be a shift. And this is why Staley's here, because Staley, when he was with the Rams, he runs a lot of too high. Keep everything in front of you, right? And they gave up the least amount of points, the least amount of yards in the league. Everything is in front of you. It's very much like too high shell. Don't give up anything over your head. And then the 49ers go out there and they have all these secondary guys as their defensive coordinators list. And then they're really going into cornerbacks. Dare I say, I know the 49ers are going to draft a defensive lineman. Dare I say, are the 49ers about to start going secondary in? And that's something that I would like to see. And I think that it's indicative of Staley being there because he's the person that can implement that.
I would love that. I said that literally this week. I said they need to stop focusing on defensive line because the NFL doesn't call holding penalties in the biggest games, man. And if you could hold, you could neutralize a lot of really good defensive lines. And maybe the better thing to do is to invest in the secondary. So I love hearing you say that. That makes me smile. AJ Lamb 88 says, will there be a press conference today? As far as I know, no. I don't think the Niners are actually scheduled to speak until the league meetings. That would be at the end of the month, but there is the new league year coming up before that. So maybe they have a press conference there, or if they make a free agent signing. I would love to ask them a bunch of questions. How did you come to this decision? Like, you know me, I love to ask questions. What is like, what role, how much will Staley be involved in the game planning? If not that much, what is he actually going to do? Like, what would you say you do here, Brandon Staley? Like, there are so many questions I want to talk to Lynch and Shanahan about.
Yeah, and you know what? I wouldn't be shocked if it was just a conference call at this point, Rob.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if it was just a quick conference call because Sorenson's already been in the building. I don't know if they make it some grand, presenting or anything like that, but it look again from everything that was being said at the combine. This does not shock me at all. The only thing that shocked me was me getting off my plane, getting to get into my next plane and seeing it drop at 7 a.m. And I was just like, come on, man. Like I literally got to start talking about this now. But it feels like, again, Sorensen, 10-year guy, Seattle defense, Seattle special teams, that type of thing. It just feels like right now, like they're going to focus on secondary. I really believe that. And that's kind of what we thought was going to happen with Steve Wilks. But if you look at all the candidates, right? Defensive back coach, defensive pass game coordinator, like it's all, I believe, going to be starting with the corners now. And, obviously, it depends on, what you believe of, Kool-Aid's injured. So that might cause him to slide a little. I think that's something that's been on the board, and I think a lot of people are nervous about right now. So that could be there. But it just feels like there may be a shift coming now with the secondary. And I see Nick's asking about offensive linemen. Today's all the offensive lineman stuff. So if you got to follow Brad, you got to follow Chase Senior, those guys. They're there. I got out pretty early, but there's a lot of meetings. I believe they already met with Aurelius Mims. That's really good. I mean, he's somebody who is, I mean, yeah, he's only played 7 games at Georgia, but my goodness, he looks like he has all the makings of a freak. Yeah, he has all the makings of a freak. So yeah, I mean, if you follow those guys, I'm sure that they can give you. I just got off the plane, I couldn't really tell you, but like today's the offensive line thing, which is hilarious, Rob, because the whole week when we're talking about, they met with this guy, everybody's just yelling about offensive line. I'm like, offensive line's not till Saturday. I cannot tell you who they've met with until the offensive linemen show up. Like, what do you want me to do? So yeah.
And Vic Knight says the Niners should have hired Art Vandelay. I'm pretty sure he's most of his background's in latex, but we can talk about that later.
I mean, he could be an architect.
Yeah, that's true. He always wanted to be, from what I heard. So you were in Indy all week long. You've been hobnobbing with movers and shakers. You've been going out to eat at night. Tell us just some of the things that you learned that maybe surprised you, or just, what have you been doing all week, Jason?
Well, I mean, obviously my favorite part of the combine is the coaches and GMs portion, so we got a chance to see Big Dom assault John Lynch, which honestly, that's one of the funniest things. So Big Dom comes out and he's with the Sirianni and Roseman. Roseman starts his press conference, and Big Dom is standing on our side, and the 49ers beat are talking to Big Dom. And Roseman stops his press conference and goes, Dom, what are you, John Lynch's security now? And Dom goes, big 49ers fan. And then obviously they come out and they embrace, and John Lynch talks about that. But, that was kind of a funny thing. But I'll tell you this. Anywhere that we went that Nick Sirianni was, Big Dom was there. And I don't know what the deal is with all that stuff or whatever. I know this is an Eagles podcast, but yeah, I just thought that was kind of funny. So some of the things that I heard is Pittsburgh is probably trying to trade for L'Jarius Sneed. And it sounds like they'd offer George Pickens in any deal. Which yes, I don't know how to feel about, because yes, the Kansas City Chiefs will lose a premier cornerback, but no, please do not give Patrick Mahomes another weapon. And it sounds like the Justin Fields thing to Atlanta is just about done. That's pretty much done. Sounds like Russell Wilson to Pittsburgh is gaining a lot more steam than people are giving credit to. It sounds like the Steelers will be. I mean, no matter what they say about Kenny Pickett, I just shut up, man. Did you know this? Jared Bailey gave me this stat. Did you know this? Tommy DeVito has more multi-touchdown passing games than Kenny Pickett.
Man, Tommy Cutlets. Good
The guy's
Lord.
played like 5 games and he's already got more multi-passing touchdown games. That's getting a little bit of more steam. It sounds like Kirk's going to go back to Minnesota. I think that's probably your best bet right there as well too. But they are firmly in the whole like either moving up, or if Michael Penix is there, who his stock is rising after his interviews. If Michael Penix is there at 32, 33, wherever it is that they're going to be drafting, I think in that second round, I think 100% you see that happen, and they'll have Kirk for like 1 or 2 more years, and they'll just let Penix sit. Sounds like a lot of the stuff that's going on. JJ McCarthy is his stock is rising because he's a high character guy, but the buzz around the combine was we just haven't seen him throw. Like we just haven't seen him throw in games, and now it's kind of like you're projecting for real. Like obviously you're projecting all of these guys, but now you're projecting, and then it's like he doesn't throw in college games. It's like is that a bad thing? And that's just the buzz around him as well too. The regular stuff, like Caleb's still gonna go number 1. The Bears are just they basically, that's why Caleb doesn't have to do. Why would I go and do medical for 31 other teams when I know I'm the number 1 pick? And,
I
like,
love it.
It's so funny to me. It's like I don't have to test. I already know. I'm good. Like that's the thing. It's like Caleb doesn't have to test because the Bears have already let him know. But yeah, the Falcons thing is real. I think Justin Fields is going to get over there and get a shot. And then the other things that are just like around about certain guys. Graham Barton, it sounds like everybody is thinking about moving him into guard from offensive tackle. That sounds like a lot of the buzz that I was getting out there as well too. And the Kool-Aid McKinstry thing is very interesting because there's a lot of talk about his character, but I think everybody knows his talent. And then the foot is coming into play now. He's not going to be at the combine now. He's going to be at the pro day. He'll be 100% training camp. Going to be very interesting to see if someone takes a shot, if he slides. And if we're talking about the 49ers in the secondary and their little flip, I know we want offensive line very badly, but it depends who's there. Kool-Aid McKinstry, being opposite Mooney Ward, and if he's the player that a lot of people think he is, my goodness, man, I think your secondary is about to help out your defensive line a ton. Yeah,
I think the 2 spots that I want to see them go in the first round is either offensive line or secondary. One of the 2. I'm fine with either one. But if he falls, okay, but I wouldn't hate to see the Niners move up. Like, go grab somebody. Don't just get like somebody that fall. Like, go get the guy you want. And generally, the Niners do that when they see someone that they want.
That's what John said when I asked him. When I asked him the question about best player available, and I asked him about drafting for need. He said we just draft good players, and he was like, we don't care. Like if we feel we identify, that's it. They have a system, and the funny part is he reverted right after talking about Jair Brown. And talking about, we were blown away by his tape, but his interview was like really what blew us away. And I think, again, the 49ers have their system. These last 2 drafts, it hasn't necessarily worked, which is why they're in the spot that they're in right now with these 11 picks, and they kind of have to make things work now. Obviously, not having a first-round pick doesn't help.
Right.
But they do have a system, and they don't care about outside perception of draft value. They really just don't. Like, they're just going to go get their guys, and they're going to ride or die with them. And there is a little bit of admiration I have for them, but still sometimes the better players right there in front of you, and it's just like, come on, man, like let's take some risks here.
Oh, Solomon Thomas. Oh gosh.
I think he went to that class with John Lynch.
Yeah, right. I think it's hilarious that Adam Schefter told a story about the Niners not scouting Patrick Mahomes, like with Barstool, and people are acting like that's new news. Like we've literally known that for years.
Like, oh my goodness!
What?
So I walk into the media workroom, and obviously there's the different teams representing, and not everybody sits in a assigned seat or anything like that. And people are coming up to me and they're like, "Did you hear the Schefter story?" And I hear him start to talk about the draft, and I'm like, is he about to tell the story about how they waited for Kirk and then CJ Beathard got drafted and the pick turned in? And it literally, and I was like, what are all of you shocked about? I was like, this is like public knowledge. I was like,
Yes.
everyone's acting like Adam Schefter just dropped a bomb. put me on the Barstool podcast, and I would have dropped that bomb. Like, I was like, Jesus, guys, let's do some research, do the knowledge, do the history. That's public knowledge.
And want to know why it's public knowledge? Because Shanahan and Lynch told us in press conferences. This isn't like Adam Schefter doing some digging and uncovering a scoop here. Just watch the oh my God.
That was insane. They never, as soon as I saw him, they never scouted. I was like, he's about to talk about the fact that they waited for Kirk Cousins, and then they pivoted and they traded for Jimmy. I laid out the story before he started saying it. I'm just like, what about this is like breaking news? Like, seriously. I'm like, dude, we're at the combine. You could make up whatever you want. This is what you came up with? Come on.
And also, you had 2 weeks before the Super Bowl. If you were going to drop this quote-unquote bomb, wouldn't you have done it then? Hey, Kyle might get beat twice by the guy that he didn't even scout because he wanted Kirk. Like, very, very weird.
No, you know what's funny? Is the Barstool guys, they were like, and they ended up with Brock Purdy, who's clearly better than Patrick Mahomes. I was just like, oh, jeez, man. I was like, you just did not have to say that at all.
You know they were going to twist the knife. Ryan Alloy says Nick Scapegoatson. A lot of people are not happy. They think that. Before we go, Jay, let me just ask you this question. Now that the defensive coordinator situation is settled, what is the biggest question facing the 49ers this offseason?
Man, I think right now I hate to sound melodramatic, okay? But let me get my hot take off.
All right.
You got to win now. If not this year, then when? Brock's eventually going to get paid. I said the same thing about this past season, but now this offseason becomes hypercritical, not only for your draft, but your free agency. Now, this is the part about the draft that's the funniest part, is everyone's like, we need this, we need this, we need this. Right now, on March 2nd, you need this.
Mm-hmm.
When free agency begins and you add another lineman, if you're able to pry away on Wenyu from the Patriots, now you don't necessarily need to go offensive line, right? But this offseason is hyper critical because the clock's ticking. Your back's against the wall with the salary cap. You have a quarterback that does not count against your cap. And eventually, if he puts up another season like he did this past season, will be paid handsomely. And now you are in a spot where everyone else is, where you have to pay the quarterback. Hypercritical off season, and if you don't win now, I fear that things are going to get hairy for winning later on. That's it.
Mike Silver had a column that they were already talking internally about letting go of some veterans that were really important to this team, and maybe that's the conversations that have to be had. But if they don't, it really does feel like this is the last run for this core team. That they, even if they manage to keep it together this offseason, 2024 is it. Because it's going to be easier to move off of Kittle. It's going to be easier to move off of Debo. It's going to be easier to move off of some of these guys. And so this literally could be, I don't want to call it the last dance because they haven't won anything. So I can't call it the last dance. But this is going to be the last chance for this core.
Right. And the thing is they may restructure Debo, right? Which makes that even harder. And that'll open up another $15 million. Oh, by the way, breaking news. Debo Samuel is changing his number from 19 to 1.
Ugh, hate it.
I hope you guys didn't buy those 19 jerseys. He's absolutely changing it to 1. But if you do that and you kick the can down the road with Debo, now you can't get off of him either. And everybody, I have a hard time understanding dead money and what all that stuff means, all that stuff. But it certainly feels like you cannot remain this top heavy when you're going to have to eventually pay the quarterback. And that's the problem.
Well, it's never boring, as I said when we started. The 49ers never make it boring. And they continued. Nick Sorensen, now defensive coordinator. Brandon Staley, assistant coach. We'll see how it all works out. Jay, I really can't thank you enough. Literally, you just got home and you hopped on a live stream with us. Thank you so much for doing that and sharing everything you learned at the Combine. I really appreciate it.
No problem, Rob. Hey, it's fun. This is my favorite. This is my favorite time of the year. Honestly, this is my favorite event. So yeah, no problem, man. I was rejuvenated when I found out the news. I was like, all right, so we got something to talk about now, other than who the 49ers have been visiting with. Yeah. So
there you go. All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your weekend. We'll talk soon.